I'm Beth Keller from the Highland Park Public Library. On behalf of the 11 libraries hosting tonight's event, we would like to welcome you to Domestic Thriller Night, an evening with Megan Miranda and Sherry LaPena in conversation with Mary Kebica. Tonight's special program is presented by a partnership of your public libraries and is hosted by Algonquin Area Public Library, Arlington Heights Memorial Library, Deerfield Public Library, Glencoe Public Library, Highland Park Public Library, Lake Villa District Library, Mount Prospect Public Library, Niles Main District Library, Schaumburg Township District Library, Vernon Area Public Library, and Wilmette Public Library. Tonight, best-selling authors Megan Miranda and Sherry LaPena will discuss their new books, Such a Quiet Place and Not a Happy Family. Congratulations to you both on your new books. We're so lucky to also be joined by best-selling suspense author Mary Kebica, who will be moderating tonight's conversation. 3 independent bookstores are supporting this event with online book sales: Barbara's Bookstore in Vernon Hills, Book Bin in Northbrook, and the Bookstall in Winnetka. Links to purchase Megan Miranda's and Sherry LaPena's books can be found in the chat box on your screen. Signed book plates are available with each copy purchased while supplies last, and purchases of the books will support these local bookstores. Following tonight's discussion, there'll be a question and answer session. You can submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and typing in your questions. My colleague, Kate Cundiff from Algonquin Area Public Library will moderate the question and answer session. Please note that as an attendee tonight, your microphone and camera are turned off. Closed captioning has been enabled. You can turn the closed captioning on or off by clicking on the live transcription or more icon at the bottom of your screen. I'd now like to turn it over to Annie Tillman from Lake Villa District Library to introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Megan Miranda is the New York Times bestselling psychological suspense author. Her books include All the Missing Girls, The Perfect Stranger, The Last Houseguest, and The Girl from the Widow Hills. The Last Houseguest was a Reese Witherspoon book club pick. She has also written several books for young adults, including Come Find Me, Fragments of the Lost, and The Safest Lives. Such a Quiet Place was the #1 July Library Reads pick, nominated by librarians across the country, and a July Indie Next pick. Sherry LaPena is the internationally bestselling author of the thrillers The Couple Next Door, A Stranger in the House, An Unwanted Guest, Someone We Know, and The End of Her, which have all been New York Times and the Sunday Times of London bestsellers. Her books have been sold in 37 territories around the world. Not a Happy Family is her 6th thriller. Moderating the conversation this evening is Mary Kebica, the New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of 7 suspense novels, including The Good Girl, an Indie Next pick, Pretty Baby, Don't You Cry, Every Last Lie, When the Lights Go Out, The Other Misses, and Local Woman Missing. Mary's novels have been translated into over 30 different languages. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Mary.
Thank you very much, Annie and Beth, for the introduction. I'm so excited to be here virtually with you, Sherry and Megan. I wish that we could be in person and I could give you both a big hug and congratulate you on your fantastic novels. But since we can't do that, I'm so excited that we can be here in this format, chatting about your incredible books. I tore through them. I couldn't put them down. Megan, I listened to yours and I was just totally riveted. And Sherry, it's just such a page turner. They're just both such wonderful whodunits. And everyone out there, if you haven't had a chance to read or listen to these books yet, I promise you that you are going to love them. So I wanted to dive right in. I have a whole bunch of questions for you. And then, we're taking some questions in the Q&A too, if anybody has questions for Megan or Sherry. But I wanted to start first with just a little bit about, spoiler free, about what the books are about. And I know that it's so tricky with this genre to talk about the books without giving too much away. So I'm going to let you do that. I'm not going to even attempt it. So Megan, you want to start first and tell us a little bit about Such a Quiet Place?
Yes, I would love to. And thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. This is such a treat for me to be chatting with 2 of my very favorite authors. So I'm so excited to be here. My new book, Such a Quiet Place, is set in a really close-knit, idyllic neighborhood the type of place where everyone believes they know everything about one another. And of course, this isn't true. So about a year and a half earlier, the foundation of this neighborhood was really shattered by a horrific crime that occurred. Two of the neighbors were found killed, and the rest of the neighbors all worked together to piece together their doorbell cameras and their security footage to implicate one of their own. And they believe they found the killer, and she was one of the neighbors named Ruby, and all of their evidence led to her ultimate conviction. The book begins a year and a half later, just as her conviction is overturned, and she comes right back into this neighborhood she once lived in, right back into this home she shared with her roommate Harper, who is the narrator of this story. And no one's really sure if she's innocent or guilty. They're not really sure what she's doing there. And there's really no good answer, because if she is guilty, then there's a killer back in their neighborhood. And if she's truly innocent, then presumably a killer has been among them all along. And that's what kind of kicks off the story going forward.
So good. Chills. Sherry, you want to talk a little bit about your novel? Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. I just have to say that is such a great setup for your book. Like the idea of a killer coming back after having been let go is very good. My new book is called Not a Happy Family, and it's about a wealthy couple, an older wealthy couple who have 3 adult children. And it's a very dysfunctional family, and somebody kills the parents, the older couple, one night after this Easter dinner with the adult children where nobody gets along. So once the murders are discovered by the cleaning lady, suspicion turns to the 3 kids who are going to inherit millions and millions of dollars. So the book is really about trying to sort out which person might have killed these people. And yeah, all the siblings and other people have secrets in their past that they want to keep hidden, and everyone is suspicious of everyone else, and you're really not clear who might have done it until the very end. So yeah, and there's a whole thread in there about psychopathy and whether it's genetic and whether it's from nurturing or lack of. And I had a lot of fun writing all these psychopathic people, I have to say.
They are fun to write, aren't they?
They are. They're the best. Yeah.
And I mean, both of these setups are just fantastic. And I mean, the books just move so fast. You know, as a reader or listener, you're just on the edge of your seat, just trying to figure out who did this. And one of the things that struck me about these 2 books is that the suspect pool it's pretty small. It's pretty contained, you know. Megan and yours, you know, we're in this neighborhood, and with this, it's a tight-knit neighborhood. Everybody seems to know everything about everybody, you know, and so they're starting to look at one another suspiciously and wondering who they can and cannot trust. And Sherry in Not a Happy Family, it's the same. You know, we have these siblings and their spouses, and it's the same, you know, that we're assuming that somebody in the family has done something to the parents, presumably, and you know, who can we trust, who is lying, and it's so fantastic. And all of the different characters that we hear from, whether, you know, first person if they're a narrator, or you know, just that we get to know through the pages of these books, they're so distinct. Every single one of them really leaps off the page, and they're memorable. So Sherry, do you want to talk a little bit about, and then we're going to come back to you, Megan, but talk a little bit about what it was like developing these characters. Did you know from the beginning who the characters were going to be in this novel, or did that kind of, you know, grow as you wrote the novel?
You know, I never really know much about my book when I begin. So I start with just a basic idea. And I wanted to have a larger family this time rather than just the husband and wife. And I was interested in looking at adult siblings and parents and children relationships. And I knew I had to probably kill the parents and then have the kids wanting the money. So that's really all I started with. The other thing I started with was I liked the idea of, you know, I read somewhere, and I've read a few times, that sometimes very successful self-made businessmen are actually psychopaths. And I've always found that a really interesting idea. And so I've got this character, Fred Merton, who was a self-made good billionaire, and he's got a lot of psychopathic traits. And then there's the question of, does he hand down these psychopathic traits genetically to his kids? And, or is it this dysfunctional way they grow up that makes them the way they are? But so when I started, all I really knew was I was going to have a murdered couple with a bunch of adult siblings who wanted money. And I thought the father, the patriarch of the family, was probably going to be a psychopath. And other than that, I didn't know a thing. I didn't know how many kids, or I didn't know anything with the wife. I didn't know how the murder was going to happen. I didn't know who it was going to be. I didn't know who the red herrings were going to be. So I just start and I go from there, and I kind of figure it out as I go along. And I kind of develop my characters as I go along too. So I don't really have an idea who they are until I start writing them. So when I'm at the keyboard and I'm writing the page, that's when I start to learn who they are. And the more they do, the more I learn about them, and they affect what happens, and it just all kind of builds organically. So by the end of the book, I know them really well. We've been through a lot together. And yeah, so, but for me, it's really, I don't know anything at the beginning. It's always sort of a leap of faith and a blank page, and and the excitement of knowing I've got an idea that excites me. So I'm once I have an idea that I think has a lot of opportunities in it and something I can really get into, then I'm good to go.
Yeah. Well, your characters were all just so genuine. And by the end of the book, I felt like I really knew them too. And I can't tell you how many times I went back and forth between, oh, this person did, no, this person did it, and so you definitely kept me guessing throughout the book. But they were just, like I said, they were really memorable, really genuine characters that I felt like I knew so well by the end of the book. So you did a phenomenal job of capturing them. What about you, Megan? How did you go about creating Harper and Ruby and all the others?
So I loved hearing Shari's answer, because I feel like I have a similar process where I know very little when I begin, and I feel like I get to know them by writing them. And I have to write my way into a story and figure out what the relationships are like. And then I feel like the plot almost forms as those character arcs are forming as well, and everything kind of is working together. But when I begin, I usually begin with a character, and I see character before plot. And I usually see, I write first person, and it's usually the narrator who I see first. And this was not the case in this book. The first character that I kind of felt like I knew was Ruby. And she's the character who comes home after being convicted and kind of shakes everything up. And kind of instinctively, I thought, well, this feels like Ruby's story, but also Ruby knows whether she did it or not. And I really wanted to kind of have that perspective of somebody who didn't know. And you're sort of seeing this entire cast of characters as suspects, that anyone had a motive, anyone could have done it. So I started with the idea of Ruby, who's the type of character who would choose to come back to this place that had convicted her. I feel like if it were me, I would be like, I'm never going back there. But she does. She goes back, and you kind of wonder, why is she there? And so I knew I wanted to tell the story from her roommate's perspective. And I feel like that dynamic really kind of set the tone for the book. They're very different characters. Harper has always seen Ruby sort of like a younger sister, somebody she's looked after, but Harper has always been the more stable personality. I feel like she's not the one who would have been like, guys, we're going to solve a murder and I'm going to lead the charge. But she's put in the position where she really has to become that character. And when I was kind of forming like this street of suspects, I was really interested in this idea of this close-knit neighborhood. And one of the things that's unique about it is it's not only people who live together and you kind of see that layer of one another, they also mostly all work together. So it's set in a college town, and there's not other industries in the area. So pretty much everyone there either works for the college in some way or one of the surrounding school systems, and they're all kind of home for the summer. And I was really interested in this idea of things from work following you home and vice versa, that this place that was so idyllic and seemed the perfect place to live suddenly also becomes inescapable because rumors from school follow you home. You couldn't just come home and kind of like shake that off and see your people who know you a different way. It was like they were just so entrenched in one another's lives. But that also helped me develop the cast, because I was thinking, Okay, so what kind of roles can people have in a school? And so we have people who work in admissions and people who are professors, but also people who work in healthcare and security. And it kind of gave a different role to everyone in the neighborhood as well. So it was kind of fun to develop the characters along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, both of these scenarios, they're just so close knit. And Megan, I loved Harper. I loved, hearing her perspective because we're, on this journey, this mystery with her throughout the book. And so we're kind of in her head and we're hearing all of her thought processes and trying to solve this mystery right along with Harper. And Ruby is such a bold, interesting character. I mean, the first scene, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but when she makes her return, I was like, what is happening? And, trying to feel what Harper would feel in that moment. So I think that you captured these characters so phenomenally. And so again, for all of you out there, if you've read it or haven't read it yet, or you're looking forward to reading it, just these characters are just so great to just kind of lose yourself in and hear their story. The setting was another thing about both of these books that really captured me. And again, this is another place that I thought they were quite similar, and that both of the communities that you're describing are not places that you would expect some murder to happen. And I feel like you can see it like right on the cover of these books. They're just like these beautiful home over here, this picturesque community on Megan's cover. These are middle, upper class neighborhoods, and they are just so idyllic and peaceful communities, and not a place that you would expect a murder. So so talk a little bit about that, Megan. What made you want to set this mystery, this murder in such a peaceful community?
Yeah, so I love like how both of our covers and themes do. I feel like they both pull on that element a lot.
Mhm.
It's a theme I'm just fascinated in. I feel like I love small town settings in general. And all of my adult suspense are set in these small towns. And I'd been interested for a long time about pulling those boundaries even tighter and seeing if I could just set like a mystery or a thriller within a neighborhood, and how technology somewhat makes that possible if you're seeing everyone who comes in and out, and suddenly you get this sort of locked box. And I also feel like I'm always setting books near woods or water. And I feel like this is like an aspirational thing for me because I just love being near both. And so in this case, I set it near both. Like it's a neighborhood, you're in suburbia, but you cross the street and suddenly you're in the woods and you're right on the lake. And I feel like there's just so much you could do with that type of setting where it is an idyllic place. Everyone wants to live. They feel like they have the best of both worlds. But it's also that kind of, I love playing with that boundary of like suburbia and then also what can be hidden just under the surface. You cross the street, you're in the woods, you're in the lake, there's a drought and the water starts to recede and suddenly what's coming back to the surface. So I just feel like there's just so much you can do with those types of settings. But it was my first time kind of writing a locked box type mystery, which felt like a different sort of challenge. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But I think in any sort of suspense story, you're kind of peeling back the layers of a community or a setting and kind of seeing, well, this is what it looks like, but what are the secrets hidden underneath? And that's sort of what happens in this community. You're seeing kind of the facade on the surface, and then something happens to shake that up and you're peeling back the layers of all the things hidden underneath, which I think is just something I'm really drawn to in all of my books.
Yeah, absolutely. And the lake and the woods, they just add so much atmosphere and so much tension. There are a couple of scenes that take place within the woods and oh, I was scared. You don't know what's out there that you can't see and what's happening. And you also in your book here, I absolutely love this. There's a map. And I know that you probably can't see it really well, but I listened to the book, so I didn't know that there was a map. And then I don't know if it was a review or something, or someone else who had read the book mentioned the map. And so I went and I looked and found it, and I was so excited because it's just it's so cool to be able to see it, visually there and be like, oh, that's where so and so lives, and to really have that visual of it. So I have to ask, was the map your idea?
So I love this map story because it was and it wasn't. So when I turned to my first draft, my editor said, I feel like you drew a map to this because so much of the story has to do with who is seeing which piece of evidence. And one of the first scenes is Ruby walking down the street and saying, Harper saying that neighborhood, that house had that piece, that house saw that. And I said, oh yes, I have a map. And she said, well, we'd love to incorporate that if we can, like, let's think about how to do it. So when I sat down to do my second draft, in my mind, I had that this was sort of the piece of evidence that the cop who lived in the neighborhood would have sort of presented in the trial to show this is where everybody lives and this is their piece of evidence. So it became kind of an organic piece of the story. So they were like, we'd love to see your map. Like, can you send it to us? I was like, yes, it's not good. And they're like, no, that's fine. But it was like the size of the sticky note. Like, it was like, circles for houses and like a line that said road and trees. And they turned it into this amazing, like, that's to me what Hollow's Edge looks like.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. It's so if you're somebody like me who's listening to the book, make sure that you get a physical copy or look at a physical copy and see the map, because I loved it. It was great. It was really helpful, and it just really helped me to place where everything was. So I love that. And Sherry, Brecken Hill, tell me a little bit about it. I mean, it's a very upper class neighborhood. And so why did you decide to set this murder in this neighborhood? And is it based on any real place, or is it completely fictional?
It's not based on any real place. I wanted to make these very, very wealthy people. So I invented an enclave that's sort of like Rosedale in Toronto, but it's not Rosedale in Toronto. It's just like that, where they have $1 million homes, and it's all very beautiful and very set back. So there's a lot of privacy and very sort of elitist. And I wanted to have that sort of family that was very wealthy and very private, like that old WASP family that was didn't want anyone knowing their business, because this family has a lot of secrets to hide. And I liked what Megan said about the facade, because I think you and I are both very similar in how we look at things, right? And yeah, it's about the facade of, oh, this beautiful, wealthy neighborhood, and everyone has a beautiful home and a beautiful life and my beautiful children. But you rip it away, and it's like, it's just a viper's nest of horribleness. And so it's a similar thing. It's not a closed room mystery, so to speak, in the same way that maybe Miranda's is, but it's a family story. It's an extended family story, and there's a lot of collateral damage with the spouses of the kids. And so it's a close-knit family. Well, I shouldn't say they're close-knit, but it's a family and they're all connected. And yeah, it's all very, very complicated and not happy. And I love to dig underneath that and see how people really feel. Like, I like to see how the parents really felt about their kids. And they weren't very happy with them, and right or wrong, they were very disappointed in their children. And so there's a whole angle of, how much do parents really get to determine who their kids are? Like, they shouldn't be determining who their kids are, and their kids resent them for it. And yet the kids have expectations of inheriting a ton of money. And the father starts to say, you've disappointed me, you're not going to get this money. And then they feel angry and entitled. And yeah, it's all very, it's about expectations and having those expectations disrupted. And on both sides, like the parents, they have a daughter who's like a wild bohemian artist who's very, promiscuous and takes drugs, and they're not very happy with her. And they have a son who's hasn't really performed as well running the family business as the dad expected. He's not the brilliant businessman the father is. And so the father sells the company up from under him so that he has nothing. And the eldest daughter is the favorite, but she's very conservative and does everything her parents wish. But she's a dermatologist rather than a famous cardiac surgeon. So, they're disappointed in all of them. And yet they've been such terrible parents. They have a lot of nerve being disappointed. But anyway, it's all very toxic. And yeah, I like to look behind closed doors and see what's really going on with those intimate relationships.
Absolutely. There's a lot of dysfunction and
Yes.
and resentment, even behind the most beautiful facade.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very,
Sometimes the most beautiful, there's a line where I think one of the detectives goes to the house where they're finding the bodies and they've been, murdered in a horrible way. And she says, sometimes having money isn't a good thing. And I wrote that and I thought, yeah, like maybe that's, yeah, because at that point they think maybe it's a break and enter, maybe they've been robbed or whatever. So, but having a lot of money maybe didn't do this family any particular favors.
yeah, no, I totally agree. Technology comes into play in both of the books too. Things like Ring doorbells and Megan, in yours, there's a neighborhood community page that people are pretty active on. I know I have a Facebook page, a neighborhood Facebook page in my neighborhood. And I mean, I love going on there for information, but more so for gossip. And, so I feel like these are real things that we're in the last, decade or 5 years, maybe really encountering, and the Ring doorbells that can just pick up, any activity that's going on the street. With this technology that you both brought into your novels, how much more difficult does it make it to try and pull off a fictional murder when, somebody's kind of always watching? Sherry, do you want to tackle that first?
I think it's a lot harder. I don't know about you, Megan, but I think the modern world with the technology, it makes it much harder than back in the Agatha Christie day to pull off a murder, because the same with your book and mine. Some of my people are caught by porch cams, seeing the car leave and, showing that their alibis are rubbish. So, on the one hand, and cell phones that can track everywhere you are, it's so much harder to write a good murder mystery, I swear. However, if you embrace it, you can use the technology in interesting ways to help you in your book, but it is more complicated. Like this camera, the CCTV and the all the forensics they have now, it is harder to pull off a murder. It's like sometimes I think, well, why didn't they catch them right away? And quite often it's just that police error, or they don't have the funding to do the tests that they need to do, or they're over, they don't have enough staff to look at things properly or whatever. But you would think, science being what it is, that they could always catch every murderer, but they don't. Yeah. And I think it's just modern, scarcity of resources, really, that so sometimes you just have to rely on the police didn't run that test because they didn't have the funds. Because I feel that technology does make writing a murder story harder. However, it is kind of cool to do some of the things that we can do now with this technology. But the technology keeps changing, so you have to keep up on it, right? Which makes it really challenging for an older mystery author, to really keep working on things like that. But I don't know how, Megan, how you feel about it. I mean, it does provide nice opportunities with the porch cams and so on. But if you're trying to plan the perfect murder, oh my God, I wouldn't do it now. Like I think in the 50s, you could have gotten away with murder, but I don't know why anyone even tries it on anymore.
Well, right. It seems like it would be so much easier, 50 years ago.
Absolutely.
What about you, Megan? How much more difficult did that make it for you?
I feel exactly the same as Sherry. I feel like I think about when I was writing this book too, I thought about how different even solving crimes from 10 or 20 years ago would have been. Like, how are these solved differently if everyone had a doorbell camera or a security footage in their neighborhood? And also, then how do criminals act differently, knowing those things are there as well? But I remember writing my first book, which was a young adult, and it was like 10 years ago, and how different it was just 10 years ago, where maybe there was a cell phone, maybe there wasn't, but it didn't have to be a major player. And then I feel like I set my books in mountainous areas, and you can be dead zone, okay, so there's no cell.
I've tried that on too.
Yeah,
no cell reception here. Yeah.
Right, because I feel like otherwise the question is why don't you call 911 right there? Why don't you Google that right, where you are? So it is sort of, you're constantly kind of trying to answer those questions that suddenly technology can provide. And I felt kind of like you were saying, Shari, this is one time where suddenly I felt like embracing the technology and kind of seeing there's other things you can do with it, because technology is not infallible either. And you're sort of
Yes.
seeing, okay, so technology shows us these things, but is it accurate? Is it a perspective? Is it showing a snippet in time that can be perceived in many different ways?
Manipulated.
Yeah, and can it be turned against you? Yeah, technology can be deleted. Like, how can things then be used that you think are for like the common good, or were used like they were put in place for reasons that seemed positive, suddenly turn negative and be used in different ways. So I feel like there are ways to use that technology as well. And so I feel like this book was maybe the first time I was kind of exploring that, where in general, I'd kind of, in my other books, were more trying to avoid those angles.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was more of an embracing it and seeing, well, you know, just because it's there doesn't mean it's solving it. It can be creating more issues.
Right. And it
Yeah,
can
I
be,
mean, I think you do have to acknowledge it now. And if you do finesse it, you have to sort of say, oh, I'm out of range, or
Right.
you can't just pretend it's not there, or you get all kinds of letters.
it's totally true. And the technology, you can use it in a like somewhat misleading way too, because some of the things that, for example, you're picking up on the doorbell cameras, you know, your people are left to like judge, you know, what they think they're seeing and what they think is happening, but we don't know if that's entirely accurate, if there's more to it than meets the eye. So there's still, you know, a lot left for the reader to try and decide. And I love the way that you both embrace technology, because I too am of the mindset like, let's just try and avoid it as much as we can, because it makes it too difficult to try and pull these murders off. So I love that you've actually just embraced it and incorporated it in your novels and made it work. Okay, so covers, again, I know I showed these beautiful covers and Megan's got hers there behind her, but I wanted to talk a little bit about cover art and titles for your books. So I know that it varies by publisher, really, you know, how it works for cover design, if you see one, or how involved you are in the process. So do you want to talk a little bit about, was this the first cover you saw? Did you see multiple covers before this one? How involved are you in that process? And kind of the same with the title. Was this a working title that you had for the book, or has it gone through many different variations? Megan, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so I feel like I have to confess that usually like I will turn in books that just say like draft, like book 4, because I know my titles are usually not going to make it through. I usually come up with a title very early on that feels more thematic than like, and so titles for me are like a constant conversation. Although this one, I feel like we got to pretty early on. So when I started writing the book, I had called it Hollow's Edge, which was what the neighborhood was. And I knew that wasn't really going to stick. And I remember I was talking to my editor about the book and kind of picked out a line in the book that I said, oh, there's a line where they said, oh, it was such a quiet neighborhood. And she goes, oh, I feel like that's the direction. And so at first we called it Such a Quiet Neighborhood. And then quickly it evolved to, okay, such a quiet street, such a quiet place. And so we did have Such a Quiet Place when we were looking at the cover designs, and they sent me several concepts, and this was one of them. And I think we all knew immediately, like, yes, like we all were like, that's the one, that's right. I love how it feels like you're seeing everything because it's this aerial view, but actually you're seeing nothing. And so I just felt like atmospherically, it fit perfectly. The cover department at Simon & Schuster, I feel like they just nail it every time. And I'm not someone who's a very visual person who can give the ideas beforehand, but they sent it to me and I'm like, yep, that's it. Like that's the right cover. It's perfect for the book. So I've been very fortunate with the covers for these books.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, the colors, you have to be totally drawn to the covers the minute you lay eyes on this book. And like you said, you're seeing something without really seeing something.
Yeah.
And just, I mean, it's so beautiful and idyllic, but you know that there's more going on beneath that. And I love the title. And I love that moment when you're reading a book and you come across, you know, the title in there, or, you know what inspired the title. And so that was a moment that I had when I was listening to your book, and I just just jumped out to me, and I was like, oh, that's so perfect. So I love it. Sherry, what about you? How did the title and the cover artwork kind of transpire?
I find titles very, very difficult. It's usually my team that figures out the title. And I think the hardest thing about titles is I can come up with great titles, but they're all taken. So every great thriller title I think of has been recently used by somebody. So that is, I think, the real challenge of coming up with a good thriller title. So sometimes I came up with Couple Next Door. Sometimes my agent comes up with the title, sometimes my editor comes up with the title, sometimes the head of the company comes up with the title. It's something we talk about for a long time, and we usually go through quite a few. The cover is a little easier. They've got a fabulous cover art department or whatever. And I believe this one for the US cover was the first one they showed us, and we all loved it right off. There's something about the really hot, bright colors, and there's sort of the shadows of people in the house. You can't really see them here, but there's like, you can see people in the house, and it's a mansion. And yeah, I love this right away, and the colors really pop. And so the title and the cover always have to work together, of course. And I'm just really happy that I have people that can do it, because like you, Miranda, I am not a visual person. I never have a suggestion. I don't know, like a dead body. Like I have no clue what should go on the cover. And I come up with, like I said, I come up with great titles, I think, and they're always taken. I Google them immediately, like, oh, that was done, or that was done. So I think I'm lucky I have people that can help me with that. And I also find interesting is that British covers are always very different from American covers. And they always come with great covers too, but they're covers specific to that market, and they're quite different. But I always find it fascinating how different cultures like different kinds of covers, different like looks and feelings and stuff. But yours, Megan, is very suggestive, which I think is what you want in a thriller title. It's like not telling you anything, but it's making you want to know. So that's what you want in a thriller title. And I'm thinking mine kind of does that too.
Yeah. I think that they both do. I think they do. You know that there is something more going
Yes.
on, that you can't see, whether it's in this neighborhood or in this home, and you're dying to get in there and find out what it is. So, and they also, I have to say, look so good on a bookshelf together. I mean,
don't they? They kind of go. Yeah.
So I'm actually going to take a quick step back. And I know, Megan, you were a scientist and a science teacher, right? A high school teacher before turning to writing. And Sherry, you were a lawyer and an English teacher. Is that correct?
That's right.
So did you always love to write, or is it something that you started doing, during your teaching career, or how did that come to be? Sherry?
Well, aren't you glad you're not teaching during COVID? Like, I'm so glad I'm not teaching during COVID. Well, for me, I always wanted to be a writer, but I never did any writing until I went through being a lawyer and I became a teacher. And then I stayed home with my first child, and that's when I actually started seriously writing. I dabbled a little bit, but not much. And then when I was home with my kids, I thought, right, I have a year. I'm going to give it a good go, see if I can write a novel. And I did. I wrote a novel in a year, and it was a literary novel, not one of my thrillers. And then I wrote another one, and those did okay. But I really wanted to write a thriller, and I switched over to thrillers. So when I was a kid, it's really interesting to me. When I was about 9, I knew I wanted to be an author, and I wanted to write Nancy Drew books, and then I wanted to write Agatha Christie books, and I just wanted to write mysteries and horse books, and that's what I wanted to do. And of course, I grew up and I became a lawyer and all that stuff. But here I am writing mysteries. Isn't that funny? I mean, it's just so odd. I started off in literary fiction. I went all these detours, law school, teachers college, literary fiction. And here I am right back where I wanted to be at 9, where I'm writing mysteries that I find really fun and I love to read. So
you knew what you were going to do from an early age.
Yeah. So I tell my kids, what did you really love to do at 9? That's probably what you should be doing. So, I mean, I think if you really want to be a writer, you find your way to it eventually. And I think people who love writing just love to write, whether they're published or not. And I think we all start off writing lots with never being published, or not even having an expectation of being published. So that's just, I think, how we all start off.
Yeah, well, your fans are so grateful for your books and your writing, and gosh, you're just phenomenal work, Sherry. What about
I'm
you?
grateful because it's a great life being an author. I mean, I don't have to go to work like in an office. I have, there's so much freedom really to being an author. You get your creative life, and you're in control of your time. And I don't like being an employee. I'm just not a good employee. I just like being my own. I like doing my own thing, and I think a lot of writers sort of feel that way. And it's nice to have a creative outlet. I found, when as a lawyer, I was really struggling with not having a creative outlet.
Right. Well, and especially if it was something that had interested you since such a young age, it sounds like it was something that you were really destined to do. So that would have been difficult to, have that kind of desire and just that inspiration inside of you and not really be able to do it. So I think it's fantastic that you're able to do this. And I agree with you. There is a lot of freedom in writing, to not have a desk job or go to an office every day. And I'm grateful for that as well.
I mean, we work very, very hard. All of us work very, very hard. I mean, we work probably just as hard as anybody working in an office, but it's just we have more control over what we do, which I like.
If you're a 5 a.m. writer like myself, you can do that. If you're a midnight writer, you can do that.
I'm a 9 a.m. writer. That's very reasonable to me. I'm not a 5 a.m. or midnight.
Megan, what about you?
Very similar. And I love that all three of us had backgrounds in teaching as well before we were writers.
You were a teacher, Mary?
I was a high school history teacher.
High school English, high school science?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I love this.
Oh my gosh.
Practically.
But I have a very similar story, honestly. Like I grew up loving to read and write. I love Nancy Drew. My mom was a huge mystery reader, and that's what was on my shelves growing up. And I just devoured them. And I loved the puzzles of mysteries. And I always said, I want to be a writer. And I wrote through school, and I also loved science. And I decided to take the track to go to college for science because I kind of knew that career path, but I always hoped to write on the side. And the truth is I gave it up for a while. I said I was busy with school, and then I was busy with my job, and then I had kids of my own. And that was when I sort of was like, this is my dream, what I said I always want to do. I can't, there's really no right time for it. Like if this is what you love to do, take a real shot at it. And so I set myself the goal of finishing something. And I mean, it was not great, but it proved to myself that I could kind of reach the end. And I was kind of hooked after that. I was writing every night when my kids were asleep. And I sent that first draft out to agents, which was soundly rejected, but I got a lot of feedback on that story and people who said they were interested in seeing it again. And so I rewrote that book twice from scratch, and it did ultimately become my first published novel. The only thing that's the same is like the title and the main character's name and like a couple of sentences. But I feel like, my first books were young adult. They were set in the world of high school, and they had this science angle to them. So I feel like all of that life experience kind of provided that inspiration of the stories I was then telling.
Yeah, it was like this merging of worlds, know? Yeah, that's so great. Yeah, well, I love both of those stories. I love when it's one of those things that you just love to do, and it's hard. It's kind of a leap of faith, I think, writing that novel and taking the time and not knowing what's going to happen and just putting, your heart and your soul into it and never knowing if anything's going to become of it. So, but I mean, both of you, you're huge successes and your books are just so phenomenal. So I'm so glad that you did that and that you wrote those first books and that you continue to write and produce just incredible novels.
Well, Megan said something that I think is really important. It's that when you're starting out to write, it's so important just to finish a novel because there's so much to be learned from finishing it. Like anybody can sort of write something and peter out, but boy, when you finish a novel and see what's wrong with it as a structure, that's when you actually learn something. So anybody out there wanting to write, it's really important that you actually go to the end and finish the darn thing, because that's how you learn.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if you don't finish it, then you're not really learning that much.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's just so motivating, I think, to actually get to the ends, because it doesn't happen quickly. You know, it takes a long time. It's a marathon. So my last question for you two, before we open it up to the questions, is just about libraries. We're here being hosted by a number of Chicago area libraries today. And I know libraries have always been incredibly important in my life, from the time I was a little girl and would go to the library and check out books, to, you know, being a teacher, a writer, a mother, and taking my own kids to the library. So can you just talk for a minute about the impact of libraries in your own lives?
Same. I mean, libraries were huge to me. I think all bookworms feel the same about the libraries, because their parents aren't going to buy them 15 books a week. So I still remember my first library card. It was yellow. It was a little like cardboard yellow thing. And I was so excited when I got it. And I remember when I was about, I don't know, 6 or 7, I was allowed to go to the library by myself on Saturday mornings. And, you know, you would never allow a kid to go alone now to the library, like without their parent. But back when I was a kid, it was done all the time. So I had to walk across there was a fire station on the way to the library. And every week I would get to the point where the fire station was. I was so afraid that the fire alarms would come, and they'd come out when I was walking across the pavement, and they would come out and hit me with the fire trucks. So I'd always get really nervous, but I would like run across the fire station to get to the library, because I really wanted my books. And I don't know why I was so stupid. I didn't think to cross the street and go down the other sidewalk. I just pushed myself through. So yeah, every week it was this like fear, you know, I got to get past the fire station to get to my library books, but I did it. And yeah, libraries are huge. I'm a big supporter of the library here in Toronto. And to be honest, the libraries were a big help to me when I started out, because I used the writer in residence program to help me become a published author. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of libraries. I think they're so important.
Yeah. Yeah, I very similar. I mean, my mom, like I said, was a huge mystery reader, and I remember that every week. So she had off on Thursdays, and that was the day that she would take me to the library every Thursday, and she would just kind of let me loose and just, you know, find the books you love. And I would come out with those stacks of books every week. And I feel like that's how I also discovered the types of books I love to read, and just the questions that I had. And I like, it's been so important to me as like my development as a reader, but also as just a writer and just like a person in general. Like I like you were saying, Mary, I continued this with my own kids.
Me too.
When my kids were little, we would go to the library each week, and they had their story times. And I remember when we were in the process of moving. And so I was writing one of my books in like a cubby of that library as well for a time. And I just, you know, libraries have been so instrumental at kind of every phase of my life, and so grateful for them, and huge supporter, and so grateful for their support as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Just such a wonderful community feel that you get at a library that you just really can't get anywhere else. So thank you to all the libraries that are hosting us tonight.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, ladies. That was an awesome conversation. It's so great to see the three of you together, and we appreciate your kind words about libraries. We also think libraries are very important. Quickly, for all of my attendees here tonight, before we get to the Q&A, there's just going to be a quick little poll. It's going to pop up in your Zoom client. It should be up there now. We simply want to find out how many people are joining us tonight. And then after you answer that question, there's going to be a couple of fun questions that pop up for you. Don't worry, we're not going to give your answers out to everybody. So if you don't know the answers to the fun questions, that's okay. All right, thank you all. So before we get to the Q&A, also, while you guys are answering this poll, I just want to mention that this event is being recorded, and you will be able to access the recording on one of the participating libraries' YouTube channels, hopefully within the next week. And also, you'll be receiving a follow-up email from Zoom that will include information on the recording as well. So don't worry. If you wanted to watch again, or you wanted to share with your family and friends, you'll certainly get the opportunity. All right, we're going to cruise right along, and I'm going to start asking some questions while you guys finish up your poll. So our first question is, how did the pandemic impact your writing, and will it be present in any of your future works?
Well, I'll just quickly say I found it harder during the pandemic to work initially. I eventually got back into my group, but I found it difficult having everyone at home and not having my usual quiet place. And I was very distracted by the news. As far as the pandemic goes in future books, like I deliberately set Not a Happy Family right before the pandemic so that I wouldn't have to deal with it. In future, though, if it goes on for 2 or 3 years, I think it's going to be hard to set a book that doesn't acknowledge it in some way. Whether people are just wearing masks in passing or what, it's going to be hard to just not acknowledge it. But I'm certainly not going to write a pandemic book about the pandemic. I'm sick to death of the whole pandemic.
Yeah, similar answer. I had a really hard time kind of getting into that headspace, that creative headspace with everything that was going on in the world and seeing the news. And I came up with the idea for Such a Quiet Place beforehand, but I wrote most of it during. And so there was a time in the spring where I just wasn't really able to access that creative part. And then I think I became a writer more like Mary in the summer. I went to like my 5 a.m. writing before everyone else was up, which is not what my normal routine was like, but kind of finding that the new routines that kind of worked during that time. And very much like Sherry, I purposely set Such a Quiet Place in 2019 before the pandemic, because, you know, you're enduring it. You're not really sure like where it's going. It was very hard to write it at that time and kind of know what the future held. And then I wrote another book during the pandemic, which comes out next year. And I set that one in 2022. So there are definite references to it, but in the book, it's not really a factor. So yeah, but like you were saying, I guess it depends what happens in the future, how we kind of address that in the book. But I'm not setting something deliberately in like that 2020, 2021 pandemic time.
Yeah, I'm not ready to read a book set during pandemic times. We're kind of still living them, so that's good enough for me. Our next question, if you could travel back in time, what would you go back and tell your earlier writing self now that you are an accomplished and successful mystery author?
That's a good question. I think I would just say, you know, to keep going. And this was, you know, advice somebody had given me very early on was, you know, to just write the next book and focus on that next book. And that's something I've really taken to heart. Like I love the story when I live within it, and then to you know, always be thinking about that next idea. And I really think that so much is just, you know, I feel like I become a better writer with every book, or at least I hope I do. And I learn so much with each book. And that's, I guess, the advice I would give myself back then. And also what I would tell them, like, you get there, you know, each book gets you a step closer to where you want to be.
I'm pretty sure the one thing I would tell myself was start earlier and stop putting it off, because I didn't start writing at all until I was 40. And I didn't write my first thriller until I was in my mid-50s. So I regret not starting much younger. But I put it off and I thought, you know, I'm not really a writer, and I'm not really, I want to be, but I'm not really, like, I'm one of these secret underconfident writers, and I didn't want anyone to know what I was doing. And I wish I'd started much younger, to be honest, instead of going off in all sorts of other directions. I should have listened to my gut. But, you know, it's all turned out well enough. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying, if I could talk to my younger self, I would say, you know, get on it.
Okay, and how did both of you decide to write whodunits? And have you written any other kind of fiction or any nonfiction?
I've told this story a lot, but I always loved to read mysteries and thrillers. That's what I grew up reading, and that's what I love to read. But I started off writing literary fiction. So I did that because it doesn't really require a plot. And I thought, when I started writing, I just started with an idea and I just sort of meandered along and didn't really have any idea where it was going. And I wrote a couple of books that way and they actually did have plots. And then I thought, I've always wanted to write a thriller. That's what I'd like to do, but I thought I couldn't do it because I didn't know how to plot. So I thought, I would try to write a thriller in secret, not tell anybody, so that when I couldn't do it, nobody would know. So that's how I started Couple Next Door. And I've told this story many times. I never told my husband what I was doing. He thought I was working on another literary book. But yeah, I sat down in secret and I wrote The Couple Next Door in 6 months and I sent it off to an agent and, it changed my life. So then I realized that I really could write a thriller without outlining it first. And I'd always thought that thriller writers had to plan their elaborate plots beforehand, and that's simply not the case. So I wish I'd known that 15 years earlier. But hey, better late than never. But yeah.
Yeah, I started writing young adult, but they were also suspense and mysteries. I've just always kind of been drawn to those types of stories. And kind of looking in hindsight, I did wonder a little, because people would ask me this, like, what drew you to these types of stories? And I was also a kid who was afraid of like everything. So why was I the kid also reading in the dark, like these really creepy stories? But I think for me, I see it more like you're following a character through something and you're making it out the other side, or kind of, and you're finding an understanding of what happened. And that's what I'm really drawn to within these mystery and suspense stories. I love the puzzle aspect of it, but I love like kind of unraveling the mysteries inside people and following a character through a journey. And that's what really draws me to this type of story. But anytime I would think earlier on in my career, I'm going to try a little bit something different, like something tragic happened, like there's like a dead body showing up on page 10 and I'm like, oh, that's right,
There you go.
I'm writing a mystery, I'm writing a suspense again. So I feel like I'm just always kind of drawn to that structure and how it puts everything under such pressure, where I feel like it's just so revealing of character. Like you don't have time to make to think things through. It's like, what's your split second decision and what does that reveal about people?
So maybe you can say it was kind of it was fate that you guys ended up writing those. That's awesome. All right. Another good question. Is there a certain author you like reading? Who's your favorite author?
Well, present company excluded, because I love both Mary and Sherry's books. I'm a huge reader of all kind of psychological suspense, character-driven suspense. I'm a huge fan of it all. Tana French is one that I like save her books for like a bribe for myself for when I finish a draft. I find her writing exquisite, and I feel like every plot is perfectly suited for the character that's going through it. So she's one of my favorites. Always. Yes.
That's such a hard question. So many were formative for me. Agatha Christie and Patricia Highsmith together, the plots and the psychology and the darkness, those two, I think were really formative for me. Currently though, like I have to go back to Kate Atkinson's A God in Ruins. That book, it's such a, like it's a suspense novel, right? There's so many moments in that, when there are just so many good domestic suspense moments in that book, that it blows me away how she can do what she does. I think she's a marvel. I really do. I wish I could talk about it, but I don't want to do any spoilers, but there's a couple of moments where someone almost kills someone, and the tension in that scene is anyway, I can't. But yeah, I'm a big admirer of hers.
I have to read it to find out.
Another one that I really admire.
Very cool. Well, we do have time for one last question, and this is kind of a fun one. I know I've asked Mary this in the past. How are the bookshelves behind you organized, Sherry?
Well, they're a bit of a mess. I have half my books here and half at my farm. They're in, they're in no particular order, because I can see, no, they're not in any particular order. I have not alphabetized them. The ones that I moved up to my farm are in alphabetical order by genre. So I have my history ones. And I have my thriller. My thriller section is much bigger than my other sections, and it's alphabetized at my new place. But at my old place, they're just all, you know, all over the place.
Okay. Well, we've definitely hit our time limit here, but you guys had such a great conversation, and we have a lot of curious attendees here and lots of mystery readers. It turns out you guys have so many great questions. I'm sorry we don't have time to get to them all, but I do want to thank Megan, Sherry, and Mary for joining us here tonight, and all of our partner libraries.
And
Thank
yes,
you.
we wanted to thank you guys for the great evening and the great conversation, the great questions, the great answers. Before we say goodnight, we're going to throw up the poll results that you all took so you can see, and Megan and Sherry, you can let everyone know how everyone did. But just in case everyone wanted to see the poll results, here they are. And we also wanted to remind everyone that the links to purchase Megan and Sherry's books are in the chat box, and if you click on them, it'll take you right to the our three partnering bookstores: the Bookstall, Book Bin, and Barbara's Bookstore. And with that, we again wanted to thank everyone. So we'll say goodnight, and thank you all for sharing your time with us, and thank everyone for attending.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Mary
you.
did a
Thank
great
you,
job.
Mary.
Thank
you.
So wonderful.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good night.